Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, a podcaster with Daddy's fuckhole tattooed on my head. But I am not driving up and down I-5 to and from LA all by myself. No, who is in the passenger seat with me?
Well, it is I, Steve Guntley, enjoying a big glass of bad dog water. And this is the podcast about twisted fairy tales, projectile vomit, and the big bad Kiefer. And that's because this is a podcast about Freeway and Freeway 2 Confessions of a Trick Baby. That's right. We are stretching a little bit today because Freeway 2 is the only one that has any kind of association with Full Moon. It is a Full Moon pickup that was not produced by them, but it was distributed by them. But how are we going to come on here and talk about just Freeway 2 and ignore the bizarre 1996 independent classic Freeway? So we're double tapping it today, and we have a very, very exciting returning guest here to join us on this who has some surprising connections to these movies that I'm looking forward to getting into. Who's here with us today, Jared?
Yeah, I can't wait to get into both of these with our returning guest. You remember him from our episode on From Beyond, which was a really early one in our catalog, but also from AV Club and all kinds of different books. I mean, just his name is out there in pop culture, and I think we mentioned a lot of the things specifically the first time he was on, but he'll have some new projects to mention and talk about when we plug some stuff later on. It's the one and only Nathan Rabin. Nathan, thanks for coming back onto the show. I thought for sure once you signed off that first meeting that you would never look back.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And I just had a double feature of Freeway movies, completely sober and in the morning, which is exactly how you want to experience this duology. Is that how it's phrased? We're pretentious.
Yeah. Just a nice hot dose of 90s era reality. A lot of
dirty duo
right in your face. Yeah. A really intense couple of movies. And there's so much interesting stuff to dig into with these. So we're excited that we were able to have you on for these. I want to start by talking about the original Freeway. I'm just going to jump right into it because we have so much ground to cover with these two movies. I think we all have some pretty strong opinions on these films. So the first Freeway was released August 23rd, 1996. It's directed and written by Matthew Bright, and it stars Reese Witherspoon, Kiefer Sutherland, Wolfgang Bodison, Dan Hedaya, Amanda Plummer, Bokeem Woodbine, Brittany Murphy, Alana Ubach, and Brooke Shields. Holy shit, what a cast in this movie. That is a fantastic cast.
And Steve, right there, just by naming the stats of this movie, I realize now there's two immediate connections. Obviously, Matthew Bright, who we've talked about for Shrunken Heads, but also
the writer of Dark Angel.
And the writer of Dark Angel, The Ascent, and also the first credit, a Kushner-Lock production. So right there, it's fitting into our very vague descriptor of what is acceptable for this show. We're pushing the boundaries, but I will say that even in saying those stats out loud, it's okay, no, there is some connective tissue here.
Yeah.
It's loose for sure, but we're there.
Loose. But look, Shrunken Heads is a movie that made a big impression on both of us. Have you seen Shrunken Heads, Nathan?
I have not, bizarrely enough.
Check that one out. I think that's going to be up your alley. It's deeply bizarre, but it's the film that Matthew Bright wrote and directed prior to this. Now, for those not familiar with him, he is one of the original founding members of the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo, which was this oddball art collective founded by Richard and Danny Elfman, which later spun into the hit band.
Oh, incidentally, Shrunken Heads was directed by Richard Elfman as well, and co-written by Mr. Charles Band and Matthew Bright. So there's some auspicious credits for Shrunken Heads.
Deeply, deeply weird movie. It is like a kids in peril movie that goes way too dark, way too fast, and then becomes this kind of bizarre X-Men kind of thing. It's a deeply strange movie, but Matthew Bright was the star and co-writer of the film Forbidden Zone, which is an amazing cult oddity from the early 80s. So he had some cachet. Shrunken Heads was going to be a theatrical release for Full Moon. They had produced it with a higher budget and with the intention that this thing was going to go into theaters. And then, as Charles Band details in his book, and we talked about on the episode, they brought the film to test audiences, and the immediate reaction was, oh shit, we shouldn't have cast real teenagers, because turns out real teenagers look very, very young. They look like children. There's a reason that teenagers in movies are usually played by people in their early 20s. It's because
or Stockard Channing.
Or Stockard Channing in her mid-30s.
34 years old when she was in Grace.
See, there's a reason for that, because 15 and 16-year-old kids look like kids. And when your movie is centering around the untimely murder and decapitation of 3 14-year-old boys, it's going to be a bit of a turnoff to audiences. So distributors got cold feet. The movie was essentially buried. Like, even in Full Moon terms, it's kind of obscure.
I don't want to send us into a tangent about this movie, but it's one of the reasons why when you watch Sleepaway Camp, it's so weird, because it's real kids in peril, and the counselors are essentially the same age, and it's like 13, 14-year-old kids and 16, 17-year-old kids, and everything about it just feels wrong.
It does. Yeah, it definitely puts you on the back foot, like, immediately. Shrunken Heads kind of does the same thing, which was really bizarre. But yeah, so Matthew Bright, I think, was reeling a little bit. I think he wanted that. He was hoping for a little bit more to happen with Shrunken Heads. So he started shopping around a script that he'd written, and found a surprising champion in Oliver Stone, Academy Award-winning screenplay writer, director, kind of a big deal in Hollywood around this time. Although I would say by 1996, we're kind of on the waning end of Oliver Stone's miracle run. This was post-Nixon, so like that's all the juice is out of him at this point. Does that mean
U-turn lurks in the near future?
U-turn is coming up, and then we're getting all the weird like post 2000 or post 9/11 movies that he did. But he's still a huge name in the film industry at this time, and so he acted as a producer for this film, and he was kind of drawn into this script, which is like really witty but really dark. And it was Bright's version of a really gritty retelling of a fairy tale. Specifically, he wanted to retell the Little Red Riding Hood story in like this really dark and gritty modern context. And in the mid-90s indie film market, like, yummy, give me more of that. Like, everybody's buying that,
this was like around the same time as Natural Born Killers. So he very much, and apparently
fiction,
original screenplay was a lot more kind of stylized, a lot more kind of retro. So it kind of seemed like that would be even more in this vein than what actually ended up happening.
Absolutely. This was the time when, like, prostitutes and hitmen roamed the earth. It's like every movie was about a hitman going through a conscious crisis of some kind, or a young woman who's like a badass because she kills men. It's kind of the whole vibe of the 90s indie scene. But this one definitely stood out. It won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance in 1996. And then it was bought up and it made its debut on HBO. And this is one of the rare handful of times where an HBO movie got such a strong response that it actually did get a small theatrical run to correspond with it, even though it was already available.
It did the Red Rock West trajectory there.
Red Rock West, Twilight of the Golds. What else was there? There was a
good just for HBO.
Duel, if we're going back to early Spielberg, Duel got that treatment. So. Yeah, it's a rare thing, but every once in a while it happens. And I think, it didn't make much money in the small release, but it has been embraced, I think, as kind of one of the great cult films of the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you look at it in terms of the trajectory of its star. So I want to take a few minutes to gush about Reese Witherspoon in this movie, who is... we talk about star making performances and things, and I think this is one of those that definitely qualifies. Maybe for most people it's like Election a couple years after this where she really, really blows up, but this is definitely one of those holy shit, who is this girl kind of performances.
Yeah, she's so good. And I was going to ask both of you guys what your history with this movie was and when you found it, because Nathan, you love flops, and this was a movie that was by definition a flop. I mean, it had a very limited theatrical release, but it didn't make any money. But I found this movie probably on cable around 1999, and it was the trifecta of Reese Witherspoon, where I watched this and Election and Cruel Intentions. And I was like, this is my favorite actress.
Yeah.
And at that moment in 1999, if you would have asked me who do you think has the brightest future ahead of them, I mean, I don't know if I could have predicted that Oscar for Walk the Line just a few years later, but I was a huge Reese Witherspoon fan, and I caught this movie, and I taped it off of presumably HBO, and I watched it a lot, and I watched it with friends, and this was a movie where I was probably, I don't know, maybe my freshman year of college or so, and we would quote this movie to each other all the time. Like, it was just one that was really popular within our friend group, but it wasn't a mainstream enough movie that just anybody would understand the references of. So, like, of the stuff we've had a chance to talk about on the show, my history and my relationship with this one goes back pretty far, and it definitely isn't just something I saw in passing. Like, I had Freeway on VHS and I watched the shit out of it. So, like, when did you could go Nathan and then Steve, maybe when did you guys first see it? Were you kind of on board with its with the press that it was getting at the time?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was a video store clerk in 1986, 1997. I started writing professionally about movies, direct-to-video movies for the AV Club in 1997, which was 27 years ago, a very, very long time. And yeah, this was a very major cult movie. Like, it didn't make a lot of money. It may have debuted on HBO. But this is one of those where it knows exactly what it wants to do, what kind of a film it wants to be, and achieves that precisely. And yeah, Matthew Bryant is a fascinating guy. Y'all might be familiar with his most recent directorial effort.
Oh boy.
Tiptoes.
Tiptoes is a movie.
Which is infamous for again, this movie came out like 20 years ago, not 100 years ago. But they used the magic of CGI to make Gary Oldman a little person. Why did they just cast a little person actor in that role? No fucking idea.
Like literally, like Peter Dinklage is in movies at this. Peter Dinklage is in.
He's the star of this. He's there. He could be the star of this movie. But like, no, we'd rather use CGI to insult every little person in the world. Anyway, like an iota of sensitivity. And that's Matthew Bryant. He's a weird fucking dude. And you look at his resume. Gun Crazy. It was a couple of years before that. Like, that's a really interesting cult movie with like a really interesting Drew Barrymore performance, kind of a star-making thing there. He wrote After Different Strokes, a television movie about different strokes. He directed a direct-to-video movie about Ted Bundy, and for some reason I watched the audio commentary for that, and the one thing that I remember is that his producer was like, the scene where Ted Bundy disco dances, it goes on for too long. Shouldn't be like 5 minutes of Ted Bundy disco dancing. And he's like,
well, his number one influence for the movie was Prom Night. So there had to be extended disco dancing sequences.
It's pretty amazing. He's a weird fucking dude, that Matthew Bryant. And yeah, he's really hasn't really done anything in the last 20 years. And maybe because all of his ideas are fucking insane. But, you know, I'd like to see the guy who made Freeway have another opportunity to make a movie like Freeway.
Absolutely. I mean, this was definitely, I mean, this wasn't in rotation for me as much as it was for Jared. I definitely saw this, liked it when I was younger, but it wasn't, it was definitely like part of that glut of, you know, early movies when you're first kind of getting into film, you know, and like I said, it's a lot of gritty independent films about hitmen, and it's a lot of things like that. And so this kind of fell into that pipeline for me. Yeah. And I remember I watched it, I liked it, and then I didn't really revisit it for a long time until getting ready for this episode. And then I'm watching it, I'm just like, oh man, this thing is insane. I mean, this is such a high wire act that they're pulling off with this movie. And I think so much of it has to do with the Reese Witherspoon performance, because I think it's great that we get to contrast these two movies, you know, where I would argue that Freeway 2, Confessions of a Trick Baby, you have to say the whole thing every time. And that is what happens when you kind of misstep on this tone. You know, where you know, Freeway is walking on a razor's edge, you know, where if you go too far in one direction or another, it's either silly or it's too dark and unpleasant. I would argue Freeway 2 tips right over into the too dark and unpleasant range.
Definitely.
But this one walks that line, and so much of it is because
was that a Reese Witherspoon pun?
Oh,
hey, there we go. But like, no, it's true, because like you need Reese Witherspoon in this movie because her physicality is amazing. First of all, I mean, she's very petite and she has all these big features, and she looks kind of like a Barbie doll in a lot of ways, not in a denigrating way. I just mean like she has that kind of all-American sort of look. and then you're running her through the ringer, making her this poor illiterate white trash juvenile delinquent who's like got the worst life humanly imaginable, but she's still so feisty and so funny, and her inflection and the way that she talks is just really bright and funny. Like her line deliveries really kind of make this movie, which could have gone in a very, very unpleasant direction.
Well, I think kind of what makes her performance so remarkable is that she's unbreakable. And she's had such a horrible life, and her mother is a prostitute. Everybody in her family is fucked up and out of control, and nobody. I mean, like her drug dealer boyfriend is probably like the nicest, most functional person in her life, probably the most healthiest relationship that they have. Yet she has this incredible strength and this incredible boldness and brassiness that she can survive anything. And I think the one of the many differences between this and the sequel is that Natasha Lyonne, who is a great actress, who seems broken. It just seems like she was in a bad place emotionally when she made this movie, and that's kind of reflected, whereas Reese Witherspoon was at the beginning of an extraordinary career. And it's crazy to think that, 5 years from now, be Legally Blonde. Those sorority girls of the world would embrace her as their icon, and she's so fucking good, and she's so committed. And there's no irony. There's just like, I am this person, and I'm going to play it as strongly as humanly possible. And the world is going to throw so much shit at me, but I can overcome all of it because I have this incredible inner strength.
Yeah, and her shitty background kind of becomes her superpower in a way. Like that's the thing that when she finally encounters this serial killer who's preying on these like broken young girls, the thing that he doesn't anticipate is just that like, her being kidnapped and threatened by a serial killer is just kind of a Tuesday for her. It's like this is like, oh God, this is one more thing I have to deal with. Come on, like And the fact that she's so blunt about it and isn't afraid is kind of what saves her life in the end. And the cover art is a little misleading on this movie. If you've seen the DVD, it kind of looks like, here's Reese like looking like a tough chick, and then there's a big picture of Kiefer Sutherland in the background, and he's looking dark and dangerous and sexy and scary. That is not who he's playing in this movie. Okay, the character he is playing is kind of this enfeebled, like middle class dork who barely survives his one encounter with her. He gets horribly mangled, drops out of most of the movie, and then only comes back as kind of like this mutant freak. But this is not a sexy role for him. This is not a seductive role. This is not a it is. I'm saying this as a compliment that he went really gross and pathetic for this character in a way that I really liked.
Well, and I love that. I love the casting here. I love the stunt casting, and I love the casting of Brooke Shields.
Yes,
as Kiefer Sutherland, because she's such an icon of kind of wholesome, all American,
as well as being someone who is familiar with the way that young women are abused and mistreated in our society.
Who, as a former child actress and a former model, has suffered probably like Reese Witherspoon's character here. Kiefer Sutherland, it's such ingenious casting because he's a big star. And again, he seems so banal. He seems so milquetoast. At the very beginning, he's got this kind of like normie dad outfit, and he's just a pervert. And there's a really interesting sort of class element to it where he is sort of the picture of bourgeoisie corruption and bourgeoisie evil, and he's respectable, and he probably lives in a $500,000 house, and he's just scum. He's pure scum. And you have this person who society does not value at all, whose society slightly more important than like somebody rotting away in prison. And yet she, again, because she has this incredible internal strength, she's able to win and triumph over, a deadly confrontation with evil. That's also kind of hilarious.
Yeah. There's kind of a Coen-esque like sort of energy to the dialogue in this movie. It's very witty. It's a little old fashioned, and it's got a lot of patter to it. Like she isn't talking like she's some like redneck girl from the streets. She is talking like she's a redneck girl from the streets in a movie from 20 years ago. If
Get your hands off my anatomy. That's my favorite.
Yes. Amazing. Yeah, that's such a great line reading, and it's like that's exactly kind of the energy they're going for, and this is like a modern day fairy tale retelling, so it is going to hit some of those familiar beats of like the Little Red Riding Hood story, but they play around with that because they realize like once people are on to what the game of this movie is, you're going to be expecting some of these moments, you know, and like kind of the big reveal of him as the grandmother at the end of the movie is a fantastic set piece, especially because he ultimately falls pretty quickly, which is always nice to see.
And calling him Wolverton, Mr. Wolverton, is a very subtle homage to the fact that he's playing the big bad wolf character.
Yeah, his stunt casting, if you want to call it that, is great because Kiefer Sutherland has this thing, and I always forget when I watch early Kiefer Sutherland performances. He was so young; he was only 28 when he shot this movie. But he always looked old to me. Like he was only 34, I think, when they shot the first season of 24, and he's playing father to, you know, like an 17 or 18-year-old. He presents very sort of like you said before, milquetoast and put together. And so like, and I feel like, I don't know when exactly that happened. I mean, he's super young in The Lost Boys. He's only like 19 or something shooting The Lost Boys. But then I think of like in Flatliners too. I guess it's true of all of those people, like him, Julia Roberts, Oliver Platt. I remember as a kid thinking those are like adults. And now you watch those movies back and it's like they're very young adults in those movies. They're in like their early 20s. But he's perfect. And something that sets this movie in this glorious indie filmmaking 90s thing, it falls for a few beautiful moments into the subgenre that I call Amanda Plummer screaming, which is among my favorite things to hear.
Like it's so glorious. I mean, everything from, you know, Needful Things to So I Married an Axe Murderer to Pulp Fiction. Like if you need someone to play nervy and kind of crazy and maybe a little drugged out, you go to Amanda Plummer, the best in the biz at that particular archetype.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Christopher Plummer was her father.
Isn't that crazy?
Years ago. I think maybe just because she seems kind of like this feral creature that came out of nowhere,
right?
And he's, you know, like this distinguished knight, like lord, like. And usually it's you know, weird looking character actor has a very beautiful daughter because they marry somebody who's very beautiful because they're very successful. It's kind of the opposite here, where a very beautiful man went and had sort of a weird looking character actress daughter.
We call what you're describing the Natasha Kinski effect.
Yes, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I found that out recently too. It's like, oh wow, yeah, like you really would not guess because, you know, the term Nepo baby is a fairly new one, but there is an archetype for like what the Nepo baby kind of trend looks like. And you're exactly right. It's not a wild-eyed character actress. It's usually kind of like young up-and-coming leading man who doesn't really have the same charisma, but like, you know, whatever, they're trying.
Or Kiefer Sutherland.
Scott Eastwood types.
Your Scott Eastwoods. Exactly,
that's a good one.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good pull. Yeah, I mean they're just both so good in this, and they're so and I mean just an unbelievably stacked cast. I mean this is very early Brittany Murphy. I think this is shot post Clueless, so like she's been out there. This is actually kind of a small role for like the third lead of Clueless, but Brittany Murphy just really excels at playing this role as well, in a similar like Amanda Plummer way. And it's also a little amazing that Murphy was able to cross over into so many mainstream roles because she seemed destined to do nervy character actress roles like this, Girl Interrupted, Don't Say a Word, like all these things where she was really standing out.
Yeah, she was great.
They're very much analogous with Girl Interrupted, where again there's just incredible vulnerability and the sort of sadness and I guess tragically the sense of, you know, there's something kind of broken and damaged about this person. Where she has very little screen time, but boy, she makes an indelible impression on a movie where like everybody is a weird, interesting character actor who's really freaking good in their role.
I also got to shout out Alana Ubach, who's kind of one of my favorite character actresses who really does not get shouted out enough, but she's incredible in so many things. She's like the Latina gangster in this one who like she befriends in prison. And I mean, she's just had roles in everything and she's so chameleonic, you know, like you can see her in everything from like the Brady Bunch movie to Coco, you know, it's she's got a hell of a range, and I think Alana Ubach just needs more shout outs. I really like her. Of course, Dan Hedaya is in here.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was like, who needs a shout out, who we haven't discussed on the show yet? Dan Hedaya. Like,
speaking of the Coen Brothers.
What is that?
Absolutely.
So speaking of the Coen Brothers.
Oh yeah, speaking of exactly. Yeah. Oh man. I mean, Dan Hedaya was like, is it Hedaya or Hedaya? I've never.
I always said Hedaya.
Okay, yeah. I mean, he was kind of in every movie I watched as a child. Like I there was an era like when I was like really young where I'm just like, oh, okay, is this guy just the biggest movie star in the planet? He's in every movie I'm watching, and I'm like, this is great. I love seeing him pop up, And
very memorable as Cher's dad in Clueless.
Clueless, yeah, absolutely.
Bring it all back around.
Yeah, no, I love Dan Hedaya. Still with us, still working. Gotta love it. Yeah, I'm very happy to see it. And this is maybe the only other
thing that the Tortellis was not picked up for.
The Tortellis is not picked up.
Went on to do a little better work in film. Although he had a prominent role in Cheers, which was
he's very funny on Cheers. I can understand the impulse of giving him his own show after that, but that was not the move.
And David Lynch uses him really well in Mulholland Drive because there's a couple of. I mean, he's in a small scene, but there's some great. David Lynch understands that one of the standout trademarks of Dan Hedaya is his eyebrows.
Yes.
And there's multiple shots of just his T-zone with these huge wiry eyebrows in frame, and that's how you got to utilize that guy.
Oh yeah, just get right up in there. There's a scene. I don't want this to be a whole podcast about Dan Hedaya's body hair, but I have to talk about it. There's a scene when I watched Alien Resurrection when I was very young. They've got him in a tank top at one point, and I thought he was wearing a sweater. Like I was not at that age. I was not familiar with the idea that men's shoulders could get that hairy, and it blew my mind.
www.patreon.com/Dan Hedaya's body hair. That will be our sister show. Let's get it up and running.
Absolutely.
He had that Robin Williams thing.
Yeah, the Robin Williams thing.
He had a bear-like level of fur.
Yes, very much so. I mean, and this also, again with the cast, maybe the only other movie I've seen Wolfgang Bodison in that I can think of. He was the young man in why am I blanking? A Few Good Men. Yeah, that Tom Cruise is defending.
He was one of the titular good men.
He's one of the good men, allegedly. Yes. And that's the only other thing I've seen him in. I think he's like a big theater guy. But yeah, between this and that, so.
And one last cast shout out just to an early Bokeem Woodbine role.
Oh yeah.
He's awesome.
I love that guy. That guy's just becoming such like a. It's not even like a Nicolas Cage energy, but he does bring such a distinctive like, all right, I'm going to come in, I'm going to do my Bokeem Woodbine thing for like 15, 20 minutes in your movie, and you're welcome. He's never like the lead of anything, but he always he brings a lot of like energy.
Mm-hmm.
But if I remember correctly, I think his character in Fargo was written as like a white man in his 50s.
Yeah,
and he just did such an amazing job. They're like, okay, he's black now, and
he was so good in Fargo.
Mike Milligan. I didn't even have to look it up. That's the character, Mike Milligan.
Amazing.
Bokeem Woodbine in Fargo season 2, a really wonderful season of television.
Well, I did want to just set up that. Freeway, there's probably a lot more to talk about, but really the reason we're here is Freeway 2, because this is the full moon movie. This is the one that slots into the structure of our show. So let's talk about Freeway 2, Confessions of a Trick Baby, which was released October 19th, 1999. Once again, directed and written by Matthew Bright. And this one stars Natasha Lyonne, Maria Celadania, Vincent Gallo, David Alan Grier, Max Perlich, Michael T. Weiss, and John Landis. Yes, John Landis is not the most problematic member of this cast. Shockingly, that's pretty amazing.
Crazy.
So instead of a direct sequel involving the same characters, Bright envisioned the Freeway series kind of like as a more of a loose anthology series where the kind of connective tissue would just be that these are really gritty retellings of fairy tales involving people who are kind of at the fringes of society, right? And so that's kind of what he wanted. He didn't even really want the Freeway branding on this. The original movie was just going to be called Confessions of a Trick Baby or Trick Baby in some markets. Which is evocative, but immediately gross. I don't know. Something about that word is just, all right. I don't want to know. But like the first one, this one is based on a fairy tale. This time it's Hansel and Gretel. And also, like the first one, it features an explosive young star, although Natasha Lyonne's rise was not as clean or as simple as Reese Witherspoon's. But I do want to take a minute on her because Lyonne is unbelievable. She's one of my absolute favorites working today. I don't think I need to tell anybody that she's a New Yorker born and bred. But she started her career as a child model at age 6, and she appeared on shows like Pee-wee's Playhouse by the time she was 7 years old. She played one of the little girls on the show.
She's like, hey, Pee-wee, how's it going?
Yeah, what's going on? You got a cigarette?
Playhouse. I got a candy.
Hey, Clocky.
I can't speak to this as gospel, but I'm pretty sure, because we're very close, we're pretty close in age, Natasha Lyonne and myself, and I'm pretty sure that she's somebody I've seen multiple times just out and about.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it.
Like, I'm pretty sure I've run into her on the street like a few times.
Was this the same year as American Pie?
That's the thing. This is her big year, okay? Because she's kind of popping up in little indie films here and there. She's sort of the de facto lead of Woody Allen's Everyone Says I Love You, where she's like the narrator of that movie and kind of the young...
Slums of New York. I think it was around this time.
Oh, it's Slums of Beverly Hills. Yeah.
Slums of Beverly Hills.
That was 98. That's another big, like, oh, who is this girl? And then
But I'm a cheerleader.
Yeah, 1999, we get this movie, we get But I'm a Cheerleader, we get Detroit Rock City, and we get American Pie. American Pie being her big crossover breakthrough. So that's 4 big movies for her. But her career didn't really blow up the same way Reese Witherspoon's did. And that is because, and Lyonne has talked about this extensively, she was in the throes of a really, really serious heroin addiction through a lot of her young life. And it destroyed her career in a lot of ways for a long time. It was, she needed a full heart transplant by the time she was like 25. She was in really bad shape. But luckily, she was able to pull herself together. She was able to kick the habit. She starts getting more and more theater roles. And then she gets a big comeback moment in around 2013, 2014 with Orange is the New Black. She has a real standout character on that show, which was one of the first like major streaming hits. So she's on everybody's radar again all of a sudden. She starts doing some great work. She co-creates and stars in the show Russian Doll on Netflix, which is another big, big hit that's really acclaimed. And then she stars in one of my personal favorite shows on the air right now, Poker Face, which is like, what if Natasha Lyonne was Columbo as like a free roaming dirtbag? It's brilliant.
The best.
She's amazing in it. It's a fantastic show. 10 episodes on Peacock right now. They slide through like nothing. And there is a second season coming. Cannot wait for that show.
Yeah, and if you've never seen Russian Doll is a really interesting one because the conceit of the show, the premise, is really the main arc in season 1, and then it does something completely different and kind of batshit crazy for season 2. And I recommend both of them.
Yeah,
a lot of fun.
Absolutely. No, she's fantastic. I'm so glad that like things have come together for her. I'm glad that she's able to kind of shake these demons and that she's coming out on the other side. And she just seems like a fucking tough, cool, funny person. It seems very genuine and just doesn't have a film persona like anyone else. Like there is one of her, and you kind of work with her where you can.
And I think that's kind of what was so difficult about this, is I kind of feel like this is a movie where her inner light has been diminished.
Yeah.
And part of that is playing this character, and again, I said this before, but you got the sense of Reese Witherspoon's character was bold enough and brave enough to kind of endure all of these horrible things, whereas you get the sense that Natasha Lyonne has been destroyed by all of the things that have happened. And there's so many things about this movie that, again, it's like it's sleazy and gross. That was what was great about the original. That's what's really problematic about this. One of the main themes is bulimia.
Yeah,
and her character is bulimic, and everybody at the prison where she is bulimic, and the witch who tries to kill her plays her bulimia and is a feeder, and it's one of those things where it's just gross, and there's not like a darkly funny element to it the way that there is the darkness in the first movie. It's just kind of like you're working through some weird issues, Michael Bryan, and like I don't need to know about this. And I think that, again, that's one of the reasons why Natasha Lyonne's character seems so again broken and troubled and you know just through this, is because again there's just this lack of energy and this lack of vitality, and you don't want to read into it, but it just seems like she was in a bad place, and this was not a movie that she should have made, and this was, the screenplay, and hanging out with Vincent Gallo probably is not going to put you in a good place.
Well,
Can't imagine.
I was gonna say this movie has per capita more vomit than any movie
yeah.
that we have covered to this point.
Not since Stand By Me have I seen so much. No, but yeah, no, it's really unpleasant. Exactly right, because you do feel like a lot of bulimic impulses come from like a sense of self-loathing. It comes from a sense of like, this internal anger that Reese Witherspoon was not showing. Reese Witherspoon's anger was external. She was mad at the world for putting all this on her, and she was going to fight back about it. And Lyonne's character here is just torturing herself.
There's a scene in Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, where Freddy hearkens to Hansel and Gretel for a character named Greta and force feeds her to the point where she has to keep everything in, and she just kind of balloons. This movie is the opposite. This is just like stuff shooting out of orifices. And for people who aren't that familiar, Steve mentioned before that this is a twist on Hansel and Gretel. And for anyone who doesn't know the sequel, like they might know the original, I feel like the original is often talked about as if it's a standalone. Although this is sort of maybe like the redheaded stepchild of the sequels in that way. Here, instead of a young girl who is illiterate and white trash who hitches a ride with the wrong person, here Natasha Lyonne is a teenage prostitute who escapes from like a juvenile hall, and she teams up with a serial killer, also a teenager, and they go to Mexico, and they fuck up a lot of stuff in their way on the way down there. And so just for anybody who doesn't really know the basic plot of this movie, but the Hansel and Gretel themes are there, and a lot of it, the bulimia and a lot of purging of things is a continual theme. And I don't know, maybe it's a byproduct of working closely with Vincent Gallo.
Which I think is a really good opportunity to turn this over to Nathan a little bit, because you have written extensively about your, let's say, colorful relationship with the indie auteur Vincent Gallo.
I have some very weird enemies, and it's kind of a one-sided sort of thing. But Ben Garrison, the conservative, campy political commentator, he's threatened to sue me because of pieces that I've written about him, including some of his artwork. To God say, look how incredibly stupid and ridiculous this is, covered by the First Amendment. Not like, oh my God. So a similar sort of dynamic happened with Vincent Gallo, where part of Vincent Gallo's art, and again, this is very much like Vincent Gallo is legitimately a genius. He is a great actor. He's got like a bunch of other weird things, but he's a horrible human being.
Just a monster.
And there's his personality completely roots him as an artist. So one of the things that he does is he would make these t-shirts, homemade t-shirts with like basically right-wing memes. It just basically be like white lives matter, like, Black people are terrible. Like all these are like incredibly racist things. And then he did sell them for like $800 a piece. And it was just the laziest. And he's like not on Twitter or anything, but like the shitty right-wing tweets that he would do, he's instead turning into art that he's charging people for. So I did an article about how fucking stupid this was and how idiotic all of his artwork is. And I got an email from him saying, look, lady, you have ripped off my copyright for your woke, pathetic communist website. And
wow, he really hit every like bingo card talking point in one email, huh?
And again, this is like I love women. My wife is a woman. I'm not object to being referred to as a woman. Like, you're 63 years old, motherfucker. I don't know.
Calm down. This is schoolyard shit.
Totally. And it was so, and I was like honored. I'm like, this is kind of flattering that my tiny little website has attracted the attention of Vincent Gallo, who now hates me and is threatening me with legal. So I think I took down the images of his things. I wrote what they said instead, which is basically the exact same thing. And then I got to write another blog post about how tickled I was that legendary character actor Vincent Gallo hated me because I wrote about him in a negative fashion and threatened to sue me, which he did not do. Although part of me thinks like, that would be really interesting. It's like, what the hell? He could take my non-existent
reassurance. Sometimes it's just reassurance that if you make the right enemies, that you're doing something right.
Oh yeah, like
Oh,
the
yeah.
sword and scale guy. He also, again, incredibly popular guy, probably a millionaire many times over. Like I wrote in passing that he was unpleasant, and he's like for 4 months, he's like, I'm gonna fucking nail this guy to the wall. How dare you say that I'm unpleasant? I will crush you beneath my boot.
It's not even a secret, right? Because at this point,
no.
like I would say most people's awareness of Vincent Gallo is just as a guy who likes to pick fights with critics.
Yeah.
Like to the point, like you don't even really like of his movie. I've seen Buffalo 66, and I remember thinking like, okay, like this is very
Pretty good movie.
pretentious and full of itself, but it's also kind of got an undeniable thing to it, And then I didn't really follow it up with him, but I did know his notorious thing was The Brown Bunny, right? In 2003, this comes out of Cannes. Roger Ebert calls it the worst film to ever appear at Cannes. And he and Ebert are just like trading blows back and forth. And Ebert is just eating his lunch like all day. Like Vincent Gallo is just getting owned all day, all night by Roger Ebert, and eventually a revised like final print of The Brown Bunny came out, to which Roger Ebert gave a positive review, so he's just like, all right, look, hey, I'm willing to kind of eat crow on this, and like not even in an eat crow way, just like, look, this is better. Like I don't know, I'm not wrong about the original cut that I saw, but this one is better. Good job. But it, and that's the movie where he famously had his ex-girlfriend Chloe Sevigny give him an unsimulated blowjob for like 20 minutes on screen. It was kind of a thing that unfortunately sort of derailed her career for a long time, which is in no way fair at all, because he was the one being the creep shooting it for 20 fucking minutes. But just take a look, do yourself a favor, go to his website. Okay. Vincent Gallo has a merchandise website. You're going to see those.
This is Steve. Steve is giving you this advice. I take no responsibility for anyone who follows Steve's advice. Just
I want this to be said. All of our money?
Absolutely.
Kind of weird.
I want to be very clear. Each one of these shirts costs $666. Okay, just so you know that he is an artist. All right, these shirts cost $668. You can look at these shirts. You can also reserve Vincent Gallo for a night for $50,000, or you can sperm for $1 million. Those are services he offers on his website.
But you can't be black. There's no race mixing. He's not going to have a mixed race child that he'll never meet and never know anything about. It's all about racial purity.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't be half and half or anything like that, and you have to be a biological female, because he, to a suspicious degree, really likes women. He really is not into men at all. So that's the Vincent Gallo minute here, because he is a fascinatingly terrible human being. So definitely, look into him. Just gird yourself and kind of look into him. He's playing a trans character, cross-dressing character. It's not clear. Yeah. The movie seems to think the reveal of him as a biological man at the end of the movie is a twist.
Yeah. Well, this is also kind of interesting in that this is a movie from 25 years ago in which the trans issues were handled with consistent, insulting, horrible, again, there's just the perception of trans people. It's a reveal, and oh my God, how horrifying. This has completely fooled and disrupted our sense of what is normal. And then also too, like, again, I think even the idea of like having any kind of sensitivity, and is this person trans? Are they not trans? Does it matter what kind of genitalia they have? Like, they don't fucking care. They're just like, look at this bizarre, freakish character, and it's a witch, it's a dude. And at the risk of saying something nice about Vincent Gallo, he's far and away the best part of this movie, and it's a really creepy performance.
He's committed. He's committed.
A creepy fucking dude, and there is this sort of androgyny to it, and this sense of him being, because again, he's not a big guy. He's kind of slight and slender, and he seems much more sort of, I guess, kind of effeminate here than he has in any other way. Yeah, and it is, and again, it's the one the movie kind of picks up in the third act when it genuinely turns into Hansel and Gretel, and not just, hey, this is like the first movie but with no fun, and everything's just kind of dreary and overcast, and I think it definitely peaks in the third act with the introduction of Vincent Gallo's character, but it's just profoundly unpleasant and not a fun or enjoyable motion picture.
This movie is arguably the most depraved film that we've covered on this show. Actually, I don't even think it's an argument. I think this movie is more fucked up than From Beyond. This is more like
that's a word. That's a word I had written down in my notes that I have yet to say on mic is depraved.
Yeah, I mean this. Like we said, Freeway 1 managed to balance out these tones. Like it is on paper a very unpleasant movie, but because it's handled with like a weird lightness, it does function as a very dark comedy. This one does not have any like dark comedy to fall back on. This one has scenes like, you know, we haven't really talked about the actress Maria Celedonio. She doesn't really have much of a IMDb listing after this, but she plays Cyclona, which is the young serial killer that Natasha Lyonne escapes with. She is doing some really upsetting stuff in this movie. There's a scene where she like casually murders an old couple and then is like masturbating over their corpses. And I'm like, this is fucking grim. This is some of the darkest shit that we've seen.
Oh yeah, definitely. And again, it would be different if it felt like there was a point to the darkness, but it seems like it's kind of an edgelord sort of movie where it's like we're just gonna throw as much ugliness at you. And again, just think about scenes like, you know, when everybody in the whole, you know, juvenile detention hall is talking about how they vomit all the time, and it's they have to encourage them not to vomit. And again, you know, the sense that there's probably a deleted scene that's just 5.5 minutes of people throwing up, because that is this movie's weird obsession, and like it's some weird kink or fetish that I don't share, and I just
well,
no, but I don't want to kick shame, but this is a creepy movie. There are a lot of things that I can't get behind.
And the Hansel and Gretel thing comes through in the binging too, because there's a lot of binging of them eating a lot of sugar and a lot of candy, a lot of treats, you know. So there's this thing that they're drawn by this candy in the same way that Hansel and Gretel are, and that, you know, like this. It's all very creepy. You know, it's extremely violent and off-putting, and we don't really get any kind of reprieve. There's no moment of like lightness or no moment of like dark or anything to really
certainly not to. And well, there is one thing, which is if you were unsure if this movie was made in 1999, it starts off immediately with some third wave ska.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It'll
I watched it with the captions on, and I'm like, wow, there are a lot of Julia Hatfield songs. It's a weird, deeply unpleasant B movie.
That's funny. I think I only recognized one.
But there were at least two. Julian Hatfield's spirit, her whimsical spirit, it infects this whole motion picture. And again, just talking about things that are unpleasant. You know, the fact that like they go to Mexico, and Mexico is hell, and it's depicted as just kind of like, you know, again, this hellscape. And it's not like anything is good in any of these movies, but things get particularly grim when they go south of the border.
When I first was preparing for the show, I watched Freeway again, and Freeway, the first one I'd seen many times in preparation for the show. Not today, but a few weeks ago, I watched Confessions of a Trick Baby for the first time. And then today, in preparation for the show, I went, all right, it's been a few weeks, let me watch them back to back. You really see the depravity when you watch these back to back, because I think I had more fun, as much fun as there is to be had, I guess, in the second movie. The first time I watched it, I was kind of like, oh shit, they went there. Oh wow, they went there. And then with Vincent Gallo's performance, which I do agree it's a committed performance, I don't love it, but I do find that it comes at a time when the movie needs something. Like the movie needs a different energy, because it starts to flounder about the 55-minute mark or so, where it's like something needs to be introduced here that's different, that's going to inject some energy. And even though I'm not a huge fan of some of the choices that he makes, I do think his energy is different. But like watching the two movies back to back, I was laughing in Freeway 1 at some of the hilarious lines of dialogue and back and forth that happens. And, you know, like you said, Reese Witherspoon's character being unbreakable makes you just kind of like smile for her, how savvy she is. When you watch Freeway 2, like the depravity of the movie is just like, you just wonder like how much more grim it's going to get. How much worse is it going to get for Natasha Lyonne in the movie? And it's tough. it was a tough sit. That third wave ska that started off the movie was very misleading in tone.
Yeah, it really is. Same with like, you see the credits and like, oh, David Allen Greer's in this. So we're going to have like, 5 minutes of Greer doing some funny bits.
Which I appreciate.
Like he is doing kind of like a big and living color style character, but his character is a rapist. And it's less fun when put in that context, where it's implied that he is taking sexual favors from these girls in exchange for legal defense. Like that is fucking creepy. So like it's really kind of gross and unpleasant and frustrating, like even when you get this little hint of like, oh, maybe we'll get a little humor, and that just doesn't happen, and to be clear, like Matthew Bright has talked about how unpleasant this filming setup was. The first movie he said was kind of a breeze. He had a union crew. They shot in America. They had a decent sized budget and some stars on the rise, and they got to kind of make it work. With this movie, the first Freeway was not a financial hit, despite its reputation and despite becoming a bit of a DVD classic. Like it didn't really have big box office numbers, so he had trouble finding funding for this. It was a much smaller budget than he had the first time around, and they had to shoot with non-union crews in Vancouver. And this crew apparently did not respect his authority, and they didn't really get along. And he kept having to break up fights between them and Natasha Lyonne. They kept like really picking on this 19-year-old girl who was already kind of struggling with some drug addictions, and she's also the type of person who's going to give as good as she gets. So, there were moments where there were almost physical confrontations between her and some crew members. And when you're doing a movie that's covering some pretty delicate subject matter, that's only going to make things harder, So maybe that is reflecting why like so much of this movie seems a little beaten down.
I think there's also something kind of weirdly passive about Natasha Lyonne's character, where she is just kind of along for the ride, and sort of the serial killer is the more energetic, more of a catalyst. And again, you get a sense of because there's just and even visually, like it's just kind of grim and unexciting, and it just is lacking a certain energy, a vulgarity that the first movie had. And again, I think a lot of it is a much better script, and then also you have this force of nature for a heroine, whereas here you just feel bad for reasons that go beyond the fact that her character is absolutely miserable and has had nothing but horror for her entire life.
Absolutely.
And if you're unsure of what kind of world you're getting into in this movie, it's the first thing you see is John Landis passing judgment on people, which should be an indicator that you're in for a bumpy ride.
John Landis sending people to jail.
Ironic. You think he did this in between making The Stupids? Like he was just on the set with Tom Arnold and then came over to shoot this cameo.
1994. Well, and he would have it's kind of John Landis style cameo that he would have in his movies.
That's very true. Yeah, that's his gimmick. He likes.
If he were ever to direct a theatrically released film, Matthew Bright might have been in it.
Hey, there we go. Yeah, it might happen. Yeah. We're due for a Landis resurgence, right? His opinion, his reputation is only surging.
I wonder if he tried to get in on the Saturday Night Live movie. He's like, I worked with them all, and I'm very available.
I know these guys. Come on, let me in. Yeah, no, not so much. Sorry, buddy. Yeah. No. So let's say a mixed bag between these two movies. Let's say
charitable.
It is really interesting because you can see how the same director, same writer, like working with similar subject material can get vastly different results. And it just really demonstrates how hard, I think black comedy is really the hardest genre to pull off. Like, because if you take a step in the wrong direction on either end, you're going to end up with something that's missing the mark. So it is really tricky to pull it off. And I think Freeway 2 Confessions of a Trick Baby really demonstrates what can go wrong if you don't have total control of that tone and everybody's on the same page, so it's a shame. It is definitely an interesting experiment and definitely kind of worth watching, at least as like a back-to-back, but just kind of prepare yourself if you're going into this movie that this is not going to be a fun little romp. This is going to be a hard sit and you're going to see some unpleasant stuff, but you might get something out of it. Who am I?
You're a sick fuck. You might enjoy this movie.
It's kind of skillfully done, right? Like, I mean, for the budget that they have and the script that they're working with, like, it's not a poorly made movie. It's definitely a cheaply made movie. And it just, yeah, but it's kind of skillfully done, but it's so unpleasant. It's hard to make it through.
Yeah, I could see. I don't know. I feel like I champion the first movie. Like I really like the first movie. I liked it as much revisiting it for the show as I did when I watched it when I was younger. The second movie is not my cup of tea in a lot of ways that we talked about, but I don't put it past somebody finding something to enjoy here. Like there's such wild swings and such like specific things that this movie highlights that's going to do something for someone. Like I feel like I wouldn't be shocked if I met a person who was into cult cinema and they were like, "Oh, I really love Confessions of a Trick Baby." I would say, "Okay, well, elaborate, please, on what it is that you like about the movie." But I do think, like, I don't know, maybe some of the things that we talked about as weaknesses are actually selling points to them. And maybe it's the depravity and the willingness to go there they find more admirable than we find a little lackluster comparatively. But I do feel like I could see somebody liking this because, like Steve said, it is a reasonably well-made movie with generally pretty good, if not occasionally broad performances. And I just, for whatever reason, there's something about the conceit of this one and the passiveness of the lead character and the grim depths that it will go. I just, especially after watching it back to back with the first one, I just can't really get behind it. Like Freeway is a movie that I recommend to someone. I'll probably watch it again at some point in the next couple of years. This one, I don't know that I'm going to revisit this because it took a lot out of me.
It does, yeah. And you watched it twice. That's above and beyond.
I've seen it 3 times at this point. I reviewed it when it came out for the AV Club, and I have a feature on my website where people can pay me money to see a movie of their choice, and they chose both Freeway and Freeway 2. And I can now say wholeheartedly, the first one really, really good. Second one, it just fucking sucks.
Yeah.
And you can see what it's going for, and you can see, what he had in his mind. And again, I think the whole idea of, let's turn these fairy tales into like these crazy 1970s style grindhouse B movies. And it worked very, very well the first time around, and it just did not work at all.
No.
The second time around, to the point where it's like, this is the end of the line. You've kind of taken this conceit as far as it can go.
Yeah, I agree. But hell, it was a lot of fun to talk about these. I'm excited that we got to dig into these, and I'm excited we got Nathan back on the show.
My pleasure.
So much amazing stuff coming up. Your writing is back at the AV Club. My World of Flops is appearing on the AV Club again. Somebody came to their senses. Amazing to see. So hopefully that's going to continue becoming a regular feature for you. Do you have anything else that you'd like to direct?
I do. I got my website, Nathan Rabin's Happy Place, which is nathanrabin.com, where I do all sorts of different things. I have a podcast called Travolta Cage. We haven't done for a while, but me and my co-host Clint Worthington, we go through the entire filmographies of John Travolta and Nicolas Cage, and I think we're up to about 2020 in terms of the timeline. So you've got
peak years for both of them.
Oh yeah. Well, I got to say, I am legitimately proud of Nicolas Cage. I'm like,
yes,
you turned it around, buddy. Things were really bad for like 6 years, and now you're fucking back on top again.
Absolutely,
and I'm very excited about that. And then I am putting the finishing touches on a book called The Fractured Mirror, which is about movies about the filmmaking industry. It's about 700 pages now. It's been an absolute beast to write. And then I also have this project where I'm watching every episode of Saturday Night Live, sort of to prepare for its 50th anniversary, October 11th, 2025. And that's been a bit of a headache. It hasn't worked out entirely the way that I intended. But it's been interesting. And I just like playing in that thing. And then I also have a novel, a satirical novel that I I don't know, I could allude to, but I don't want to say too much because I don't know what the hell will happen with it.
Okay.
So I'm just working on lots of stuff, and then I've got my own Substack, Nathan Rabin's Bad Ideas, where I write about new movies in the theater, which is really interesting, and then I write about sort of vulgar franchises. I've written about Ernest P. Worrell, I've written about Fast and the Furious, I've written about the Silent Night, Deadly Night movies. Boy, those are really interesting.
That's
Yeah,
a fun set. Yeah.
yeah, I'm nearly done with Police Academy. I just have Police Academy 7, Mission to Moscow, and then Nightmare on Elm Street. So yeah, so Nathan Rabin's Bad Ideas, so Nathan Rabin's Happy Place, Travolta Cage, and then The Fractured Mirror when it comes out.
So you've
That's
just been kicking
amazing.
your feet back, basically doing that. Yeah, that's what you're saying. Yeah, nothing going on really.
Yeah, and we're really thankful that you found the time to come and join us again. And one of the things about your books, there's a bunch of them, and so I kind of got a little tongue-tied in my introduction early on. But one of the things that I always love about that I see you posting is that these projects and these books that you've written, you have been putting out a lot of new editions of things. So I love that. Like I'll see like your My Year of Flops, and then or it'll be like your weird accordion to Al book with like its 5th edition where it's like shameless cash grab one or whatever that one is called. And like I love that you keep going back to these things because like I do feel like when it comes to pop culture, we all consider ourselves to be pretty knowledgeable about certain stuff, but we're constantly learning and constantly discovering things. And it's like, we'll do an episode on a movie and then I'll have a conversation in passing with somebody I didn't know worked on the movie. And then all of a sudden it's like that opens up a whole new thing where it's like, all right, well, should we cover the movie again? We have all this other like insight, but you've got all of those fun books and the multiple editions, which I really enjoy. And if you're someone who enjoys the show that we bring to you week to week, you can show us by jumping on to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, dropping us a little 5-star rating, maybe a review if you feel so inclined to do so. If you want to keep up with the show and what we've got going on, you can follow us on Instagram at puppetmasters_castlefreaks. You can follow me at _Giallo_Jerry or Steve at Minotaur Matador. We post audio versions of the show on YouTube, and we do post regularly on Twitter or X. And maybe we'll see us back on Threads or Blue Sky. We haven't really been using it too much. But those are the avenues. If you want to keep up with the show, we are very easy to find. But we are not the only show that Steve would like to talk about at this moment. Steve, what else have you got that people can find?
Well, I also have a show called Cinema Arcade, which is cinema and arcade mashed together. That is what we do. We are watching movies and then playing the games based on those movies in another similar Nathan Rabin-esque mashup of completionist movie projects. Gotta love checking off items off a list. So,
well, if I could say something cryptic, the novel that I wrote, my wife is editing right now, is a parody of a movie based on a video game.
Ooh. Oh my God. Okay.
A very weird book based on a movie based on a video game.
Amazing.
Okay. We're gonna have you on the show around the time that comes out. So that's an ideal tie-in.
Talk about like worlds colliding there for a tie-in. That's amazing. You can't get any better than that.
Yeah, right now this is coming out in October, so I imagine we are in the midst of our all horror movie month like we did last year. Every October I get very excited about it, so I don't know exactly what's going to be on the list. I had some things planned out. We might be talking about John Carpenter's The Thing. We might be talking about Killer Clowns from Outer Space. We might be talking about Nightmare on Elm Street. Who knows? Tune in to find out. And also be sure to tune in to us next week. We have another very fun episode for you. We are going to be talking about a 2022 film. That's right, a very recent film for us. But it is a sequel to a classic. It is Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bolorama 2. And we are going to be talking with a super fan of that our franchise, Dr. Rhonda Bachman. And we are also going to be talking to the director, co-star, and star of the original film, as well as numerous full moon movies. The one, the only, Brink Stevens is going to be on our show. Scream Queen extraordinaire. We have already recorded that episode. It was so fun to talk to both of them. We had a great time, and we were nerding out the whole time. So, be sure to tune in for that one. Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bolorama 2 with Rhonda Bachman and Brink Stevens next week.
Thank you again to Nathan for joining us. Thank you to everyone who is listening, and we will see you next time.